So it's a bit difficult to come after beautiful girls drinking beers, wine, and Barack Obama. It's scary. So I will speak about emerging markets quite quickly because I think you must be exhausted and want to eat. But since it's a topic that gives us hope, it's relevant to speak about it at the end of a country risk conference to not be such in a dark mood. So we are positive about emerging markets, and we see them growing very much. Although they are slowing down, you see our prospects. It's very, very strong Asia, and of course, still pretty strong Africa also. I will deal with Asia, then Latin America, and then I will end with the Middle East. Just the main risks, the most important one clearly is the effect of the Eurozone crisis and whether it will affect emerging markets. Of course, through the trade channel, because many emerging markets are trading with Europe, but also, and I will just stop with that, about the credit channel. There is another element that we see in emerging markets and that we see, for example, mostly in Latin America, is rising protectionism. I think that the emerging markets have now the idea that the globalization is not so good for us. And I think it's for them, sorry, and that's mostly true since 2009. You have seen a lot of actions coming from emerging markets saying, well, we have to protect ourselves from the shocks coming from outside, especially because these shocks have nothing to do with us. They are coming from the US, they are coming from Europe, but we are not responsible for them. So this is why we are going to protect ourselves. And you see that clearly happening. And of course, with the recent event in Argentina, with some measures taken in Brazil, you see that it doesn't only deal with finance, it now deals with investments, it deals with imports. So it's clearly a move that's I think, going to be grow. And of course, there are still the political tensions or unrest coming from the Arab Spring, which of course go now much beyond Middle East with what happened in Russia, for example, after the elections, before the presidential elections and after the legislative elections. So what about the problems of banks? Well, I think this is something that we are very sensitive in France, because it happens that French banks are traditionally very, very active in emerging markets. And what you see, for example, at the exposure of banks is that for the moment you see that most of the banks, European banks, they have reduced their exposure towards advanced economy, and as I said, mostly towards Europe. European banks have stopped, in a way, of reduced its exposure towards Europe. But you see that towards emerging markets, the picture is not that bad for the moment, although you see that in the last quarter available numbers, you see it's decreasing a bit. And it's extremely important because some of emerging areas are very, very dependent on European credit, especially Eastern Europe. You know, something like 25% of the growth in the past years of emerging Europe is explained by credit coming from European banks. So if these banks, these Italian banks, these French banks, stop granting credit in these economies, it will have a high cost in terms of growth. And of course, closer to her, there is the issue of Spanish banks in Latin America, whether these Spanish banks will have to, you see the bank exposure on emerging markets in percent of GDP of the emerging markets area. So you see that in Latin America, European banks, it's 15% of GDP. It's not nothing. And you see that it's almost 10% for Spanish banks. Of course, I don't think that the Spanish bank will close their exposure to Latin America, because after all, it's their strengths. The banks that are doing well in Spain is the ones that are pretty active in Latin America. But still, there is something that we have to watch, is what are going to do the banks, French banks, the Italian banks, the Portuguese banks, the Spanish banks, with emerging markets, and at what cost they will have to deleverage from their exposure. And that has nothing to do with emerging markets in a way. They do not deleverage because there is a problem in emerging markets. They deleverage because they need to downsize the balance sheet. And the cost will be to whatever. And this is a question that, for example, is not only sensitive in emerging Europe. I was in Morocco 2 weeks ago, and for them, whether the French banks that are here will go out of Morocco or will stay in Morocco is absolutely crucial for them. So these questions are, in some countries, really important. So what about China? Well, China doesn't really depend on European banks, that's for sure. It's rather more now Europe that will depend on China. But they have certainly a lot of problems of their own now. And what I think is happening in China is that they are, in fact, they are stuck in a problem that they cannot really solve, and they don't know exactly how to do it. On the one hand, there is this crisis coming from outside, which is now clearly touching them, because they are a huge partner of the European Union in terms of trade. And so they see that if they don't act, this will have an impact on growth. But on the other hand, they have another goal, which is to change their growth model. They have to slow down. They have to completely switch the model from an investment-led economy to a consumption-led economy. So what can they do? If, for example, today they make a kind of fiscal package that they do in 2009, they free credit again, what will happen is that investment will grow, of course, very much, but then, of course, they will miss their other target, which is to change the model. And if they don't do anything, what they risk, of course, is a very strong slowdown with social problems, with bankruptcy, a lot of bankruptcies, because a lot of corporates are fragile in China. So they are kind of stuck. And you see now that they don't know exactly what to do. They hesitate a lot. Sometimes they announce they will be very strict on monetary policy, they will be very strict. And sometimes they announce, oh no, finally, we will be a little softer. And you see that there is this balance, because they don't know how bad will the crisis be in Europe, how bad it will affect them, and if they have to deal with it or not. So I think in this time, my bet, but we will be, if I'm coming next year, you will see if I win my bet, is that they will act. I think they will do a kind of fiscal package, a kind of help, because they are very much afraid about slowing down too fast. I think they want to slow down. And when people say, oh, it's horrible, China is slowing down, of course, they need to slow down. They are growing much too fast. But they want to do it very, very slowly. And if it's going too fast, they will act. So they will, of course, relax monetary policy, relax credit. So I think this is my bet. On the other hand, they have to deal with a problem, which is they have let, the problem with the Chinese authorities that they do not control very well their economy. And the thing is, they have let this local government, the debt growing very much. We have the official figures of 34% of GDP. Maybe it's much more. And by the way, this local government didn't have the right to do it. It was forbidden to get debt. So they did it, against the rule of the central government. And maybe now, because the real estate market is slowing down, some of this local government will be touched. So what the Chinese government will do? For the moment, they have been very nice with these local governments. They have refinanced all the debt. But maybe they want to do an example. They want to say, okay, you've done a lot of bad things, so now you go to bankruptcy. I don't help you. And of course, this may affect some companies which are dependent on their local government. So this may happen. In the actual context, I'm not sure they're going to do it because they don't want to risk anything. But clearly, there is a risk that they want to impose some discipline in the economy, and that you may have some problem with a local government or a local company, because here again, there is too much debt in the economy. So we make a survey every year, and we are asking what are the main risks for Chinese business in our survey. And this year, we have seen, of course, still the problem of tighter monetary policy, because still there is a problem of credit. Of course, credit is very dynamic in China. It's slowing down, but it's still something like 25% growth. So it's still very dynamic. The problem is that this credit goes to the public sector. It doesn't go to the private sector. The private sector doesn't have access to credit. So they have a big problem of access to credit. The second problem is, of course, higher commodity price. But, a survey was done some months ago. So now I'm not sure it's still the problem with the tendency of inflation in China. But you see, one thing is interesting is increasing wage and salary. Because you know that now the big demand from the center is to raise salaries in China. This is a very important issue because, of course, they want to go in a consumption-led economy. And to boost consumption, they have to have high salaries. And now this tends to worry some corporates, because there are many corporates in China that are fragile, especially in low added value sectors. So of course, in the macro level, China is strong, and China is able to control the slowdown if it happens, and to control the effect of the European crisis. What I'm saying here is that on the micro level, on the corporate level, you have a lot of fragilities in China, and you have to be careful. You can have a lot of bad surprises. So this is why you have to take some credit insurance from Coface. For our assessment, it's stable. It's a very strong area in Asia. So we have not many issues. We are still a bit worried about Vietnam, which has been downgraded. But I think now the situation is not getting better, but it's stabilized a bit. We see that the overheating is stabilizing a bit in Vietnam. So this is rather a good news, although it's still pretty risky in terms of exchange rate. For Latin America, this is really, the area that's been done an amazing performance. The thing is that when you look at the public debt, you see, in purple the advanced economy, and you see Latin American public debt slowly going down very much, and you see the work that the governments have done in Latin America that has been amazing, and you see the same with corporates in Latin America. The corporates in Latin America are much more well managed, they are less indebted, or when they are indebted in local currency, not in foreign currency. So clearly you have a management in terms of finance from the private sector and the public sector that has improved very much in Latin America. The thing is now is Latin America is slowing down very much, and of course the big giant Brazil is slowing down now. And it is true that last year it has slowed down a little bit too much. There has been a sort of overshooting in Brazil. They have to struggle with many things, but I still think that Brazil is a very good risk. Although the slowdown has been too much, now we are betting on 3.4%. I think the potential growth of Brazil is a little more than that. It's more like 4%, so they can do more. But still, I think if there is one economy in the world that is really an emerging economy, it's Brazil. It's amazing the work they have done, the quality of corporates, the experience that we have in terms of payment now, how volatile it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and how resilient it is now, how the corporates are much stronger. So really, I think if there is a country to bet in the world, it's clearly Brazil. I wouldn't say as much as Argentina, although it's of course slowing down very much, but there is still a huge problem with the business climate in Argentina, and the fact that the government takes measure very suddenly, and you have to change the rules very often. And plus, we have a problem now in Argentina is that they have a kind of exchange rate control of foreign currency. So it's very difficult to get foreign currency in Argentina because it's controlled, and now so we have some payment delays because of that. Not really non-payments, but payment delays due to decisions typical of the Argentinian government. Now, we've talked about China, and you have to realize that in emerging markets, there is a debate now on China, and whether, of course, many emerging markets depend on China. It's true for Brazil, it's true for Argentina even more, it's true for Chile. Now, the problem is that there is a big cost in terms of dependency on China, because the things that these countries export to China is raw materials. And this is a big issue for Brazil, because Brazil wants to be a large exporter of manufacturing goods. And what they say is that China participates to a movement of disindustrialization of their economy, which is eventually very dangerous. And this debate, you find it everywhere now. Again, I was in Morocco. They are obsessed with China also, because China, they are invaded with textile from China, which is even cheaper with the cost of material in Morocco. And Morocco, is a big exporter of textile in Europe, and they are struggling. So clearly now, of course, China helps a lot in terms of investment, in terms of as a partner, but also it has a cost because it penetrates this market very heavily. And you see this is a very key element for Latin America. They have to keep the industry. It's a key element for Brazil. Brazil is just 50-50, it's 50% manufacturing, 50% raw material. This is their big strength, and they have to keep it that way. And this is why, by the way, now the Brazilian government has taken a lot of measure to stop this movement and to favor its domestic industries. They have increased their taxes on cars inside. They have all the public orders now. There are some key industries, domestic industries, that are favored. So clearly they are now going in terms of they want to defend themselves, not only from China, but by the way, of course, China is targeted here. And I think this is going to be the key debate for emerging markets very soon. It's the same in Asia. In Asia also, a lot of Asian economies are wondering about how costly will be this dependence on China. For Brazil, of course, There is the problem of also capital flows. I mean, they have these problems that people invest in Brazil so much, and they have a huge current account deficit. They finance it by capital flows, meaning the exchange rate, the real, is increasing. And that's, of course, also has a cost on industry, because the Brazilian industry becomes less competitive. So they have a lot of issues with the industry, with keeping their industry, which is really the main debate now in Brazil. But nevertheless, I mean, they have this amazing ability to deal with the problems, and that's also the big change. Before, you know, when there was a problem, they were completely lost 10 years ago. Now they take a lot of measures. They, of course, some protectionist measures, but at least you see a government that is acting very strongly in Brazil. So we have not many news, except we have left the positive watch on Argentina. We are a bit optimistic about Argentina. Of course, the growth has been very strong in Argentina, but with these new measures on foreign currency, we have left our positive watch in Argentina. We also left our negative watch on Venezuela. So it was a difficult decision to make because, of course, Venezuela is not a non-risky country. But we were saying if we put a negative C, meaning it will be a D country, does Venezuela deserve a D country? And the problem with Venezuela, as maybe you know, is that when the oil prices are going down, you have a payment problem from Venezuelan corporate because the government begins to rationate foreign currency. And this is why we experience in Coface many times, is that whenever the oil price go down, we have late payments in Venezuela. This is why it is a problematic countries. Now, with the level of oil price that we have, we see that we don't have so many late payments anymore. So it's true that, let's say, the economic environment is better, plus, you know, after some years of recession, Venezuela is positive. Of course, there are lots of political risk in Venezuela. There are still a difficult business climate, but I think D would have been much too severe, so we are in C. So finally, Middle East. I think, you know, as a country risk economist, I think I've had too many shocks since 2009. I've seen Lehman Brothers, I've seen Greece. And after I've seen the Arab Spring, and it was also a big trauma because for French, you know, we were used to think that all these countries were stable, that they were these nice dictators that they were there to stay. And of course, we completely overlooked a lot of things. We were completely wrong. And I think what we overlooked in emerging markets is the fact that there is a phenomenon of growing middle class that changes everything. These middle class are much more demanding in terms of political rights first. They want to express themselves. They want to be part of the political landscape, but not only. There is another dimension in the Arab Spring, which is also an economic dimension, which is the issue of entrepreneurship. One of the key elements in Tunisia, for example, and by the way, why it started, it's because a young guy couldn't have an access to a place to sell his fruits, meaning clearly that you have this blockage to being an entrepreneur when you have not the right connections. This is typical of Egypt. This is typical of Tunisia. This is also typical of Russia. And meaning when you have these young people who are sometimes who have a very high level in terms of education, and who see that the system is blocked because they cannot grow as a middle class to grow their own company because they are blocked by the political landscape, it means a lot of frustration. So this dimension of whether you leave entrepreneurship, breathe and grow, or whether you have the system, the political system that's in a way takes over any growing middle class that tries to grow by itself, I think makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. And this is why, for example, Morocco is a bit different than Tunisia, because in Morocco, you have some SMEs, you have some possibilities to grow your company. I don't say it's a perfect area, but still there is, and of course, the example is China. China, of course, you don't have really a democracy, but you have a very strong entrepreneurship, meaning that you can grow your company in China. And that makes a lot of difference in terms of possibilities. I don't say there are no political and social risks in China, there are many, but at least on that level, they have been quite efficient to promote the private sector. I've never seen so many books about entrepreneurship than in China. They are obsessed with entrepreneurship. So this is an interesting aspect. Another element that we are looking at now is the cultural changes. So, of course, there is this internet issues that's very important. You see that, of course, it has changed completely the way people are dealing with democracy, with the relationship within the community. But there's also some elements, for example, we have seen in many of these demonstrations, many women of course, in Egypt, in Tunisia. And one of the things that we completely ignored is the fact that, for example, we look at the fertility rate of Egypt, it's very close to Europe. Meaning that now women don't have the same role in the societies than they used to have 10 years ago in Morocco, for example, in Egypt, in Tunisia. And it changes also a lot in terms of the political pressure to change. So I think all these elements, which are cultural elements, now should be integrated in our country risk view. This is something that we are trying to develop, that we have to look at the cultural changes, the way the middle class behaves, the entrepreneurship, to be able to look at the political pressures to change. So I finish here. Just to say that we have downgraded Egypt. We have some payment problems in Egypt due to the fact that the economic situation is extremely difficult, due to the fact that there is a shortage of US dollar in the economy, and of course due to the fact that the political scenario is very uncertain in Egypt. But on the contrary, we have left the negative watch on Tunisia. Because first, during the political problems, we didn't have any claims from Tunisia. So meaning that the corporates are pretty resilient. And now we believe that growth will restart a bit, not strongly, but at least a bit, meaning that the situation has improved a bit in Tunisia. So this is where I close. And thank you.